You're listening to Diminished Returns, the podcast about sequels, prequels, spin-offs, and reboots. This is just a quick bonus episode, deleted scene, if you will, from our last episode 96, about Cruel Intentions. We took this chat out of the previous episode, and basically me and my podcast husband Alan will be talking about the Cruel Intentions soundtrack and sort of 90s soundtracks in general. I hope you enjoy. Let's talk about the soundtrack, because you mentioned about 10 teen films earlier on, and every one of them has the same Cardigans song. They all have the same 90s soundtrack.
All pulling from like best of 90s soundtrack album.
When was Romeo and Juliet made? 96, 97?
Romeo and Juliet is 1996, yeah.
Right, so this is 3 years later, and they used the Cardigans' Loveful,
Loveful,
right?
yeah.
Which was the big song from Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
So what I like about this is that either that's the laziest fucking soundtrack choice in history, or he's went, you know what teenagers listen to? The Romeo and Juliet soundtrack, and they've put songs from the Romeo and Juliet soundtrack on this, because he's like, that's what they would listen to in the fucking pool house. Which is dumb, but I love it.
Yeah, so obviously like the MTV Movie Award that they won for the Kiss, when Sarah Michelle Gellar's teaching Selma Blair how to French.
As a young man in the late 90s, I don't recall it.
I can only imagine there was a few awakenings for people during that sequence. I mean, certainly had to have a lie down after it myself. But the soundtrack, while that's happening, it's the Coffee and TV were Blur from their American alt rock phase.
Yeah.
And then the big love scene between Reese and Ryan, that's the Counting Crows.
Oh yeah, it's a Counting Crows song, because
They were really big in the 90s.
now here's the thing, right? Counting Crows, a band who the first side of August and Everything After, I think, is a great run of like 4 or 5 tracks of that kind of singer-songwriter, R-E-M-E acoustic thing. But this is probably something that you don't get as much nowadays. But I remember hearing that album, and it was about 6 months later when I actually saw what they looked like, and I was like, oh, it's a white guy with dreads. You're done. I'm sorry, mate. You have a lovely voice, but look at the nick of you. Counting Crows look like a band that's staffed entirely by the second on-tour guitar player of other bands, right? And the singer has kind of dreadlocks or whatever, and
I think he went out with Courtney Cox when she was at the height of her Friends fame.
Nice.
Yeah, he seemed like one of those kind of like de rigueur rock stars. Of course, this is like the late 90s. It's alt rock rules America, if not the world at this point. In fact, Cumble wanted to use To Sheila by the Smashing Pumpkins, but Billy Corgan said no, and so they got the Counting Crows Colorblind instead.
Nice.
And it closes out the whole movie with the Verve's Bittersweet Symphony.
Yeah.
That was like the big thing. So it was like for America, they released that single with a video that had like sequences from the movie and stuff.
Who would have thought that, like, the beautiful faces of Sarah Michelle Gellar and Ryan Phillippe would do a better job of promoting the Verve than Richard Ashcroft walking down the street bumping into people like a prick? Record companies, what they like.
I don't know. To think of being the film's actual composer, and then you're just like, I get to do this bit when you're not playing whatever alt-rock classic.
Yeah.
It must be a little disheartening. But the movie spawned like a jukebox musical in 2017 or something, and it played off Broadway for a few years. It just takes me back to that very particular time. Like, I was working a record shop at this time, and inevitably whatever movie had come out on a Friday, people would come in on the Monday and want songs from, like, I remember this old couple that came in and they'd been to see American Pie on a Friday night and were in the shop wanting to know why the Etta James At Last wasn't on the soundtrack from American Pie. You're just like, yeah, but Bic Runga's on it. And I'm like, oh, amazing. I want to hear At Last.
I mean, there was your sort of last gasp of, like, we've obviously before iTunes and stuff like that, so it was like, oh, these are all these cool songs that I own a bunch of fucking soundtracks. Clerks,
yeah,
Basketball, and it was like, oh, these are a bunch of cool songs that I associate with fun films or whatever. And so some things would be like, this is the only place you would hear certain, music when you had to buy music. And from what I gather, was a fucking nice earner for bands back in the day.
I can only imagine, yeah.
Sweet little earner. In the 90s, you could make a fucking wedge.
Like, They Might Be Giants probably made more money from the theme tune to Malcolm in the Middle than they ever did from, like, Flood in 1990.
Yeah, right? So the soundtrack things, I mean, that is very of its time. I know now, to the younger listener, even paying for music at all is like hearing your great granddad talk about shitting outside. Like they've never had indoor toilets. Like, wait, you had to fucking pay for music? You did. What we're saying is, young people, you're too spoiled, you're too lucky, you've had it too easy. Look around you right now. There's no problems in society or anything that's going to cause you any issues over the next couple of years. So go fuck yourselves. Wait, what? I'm just going to turn on the news. I've not watched the news for 6 months. Give me a second while I catch up. Oh, I'd like to apologise for everything I've just said. Boy, did I misjudge that. If you enjoyed this and you've not listened to the other episodes, you can look back and listen to the full episode about Cruel Intentions and a whole bunch of other stuff, and frankly, lots of filthy chat. You don't know what you want. I'll tell you what you want.
What you really, really want?
I'll tell you what. The one 90s song that was not in that soundtrack.